As I write this in the first week of October 2024, we are approaching the premiere of the newest round of Halo cars from Porsche, McLaren, and Ferrari, the holy trinity of hypercars. With the McLaren W1 confirmed as being a hybrid, the Ferrari F250 expected to be a V6 hybrid, and the Porsche Mission X initially being announced as a full-on EV, one can't help but reminisce about the fire-breathing V12s, V10s, and V8s of yesterday. Today, we are lucky to even get a lap record. In the early to mid-90s, you could actually watch the world's most beloved Halo cars battle head-to-head, one of the greatest racing classes of all time. This was Group GT1. Not only would the GT1 class exploit and push these supercars to the extreme boundaries for the world to see, one manufacturer would push the boundaries themselves to develop probably the most extreme sports car in GT history. Originating from the BPR Global GT series, FIA GT1 was an international sports car racing class that debuted in 1993 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. GT1 throughout its lifetime consisted of 4 different distinctive eras: 93 to 96, 97 to 98, 2000 to 2009, and 2010 to 2011. Before they became Le Mans prototypes, from the 93 to 1996 era of GT1, you could watch the homologated supercars race head-to-head on legendary tracks across the world. This included Lotus Esprits, the F40 LM and GTE, Callaway Corvettes, XJ220s, the Supra, Panteras, Vipers, and the list goes on. Even the exceptionally rare Bugatti EB110 LM, NSX GT1 Turbo, and the Toyota MR2 based MC8R would compete in this class. Adding to this holy grail of a grid in 1995 was McLaren with the F1 GTR. Though the F1 was never meant to be a race car, growing popularity of the BPR series had begun to pique the interest of several McLaren road car owners and racing teams alike. Given that the F1 was released only a year after the debut of the GT1 class, it did not take McLaren long to create their own racing program. They would have a total of 9 F1 GTR chassis built to spec for the 1995 race season. These chassis required minimum deviation from the standard road-going car. The most notable modifications would be the aero bits, carbon brakes, and a complete weight reduction in roll cage. The S70 V12 utilized a restrictor plate per the FIA regulation, limiting the brake horsepower to 592. The F1 became the most popular car in the world in 1995, winning its debut race at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Not only would the famous 01R car win first place overall, finishing 298 laps, but 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 13th places were also taken by teams winning the F1 GTR. McLaren had become distinguished and defined an era, much like the Ford GT or Porsche 935 in their day. At this point, the only Ferrari platform competing in the GT1 class was the F40 GTE, which was still based on the old 1987 F40 architecture. That being considered, the lead F40 at the 95 Le Mans would place a respectable 12th overall, but still 28 laps behind the lead F1 GTR, only completing 270 laps. Even though the 1995 F40 GTE had a displacement increase from 3 to 3.5 liters, newer cars like the McLaren and upcoming 911 GT1 simply just rendered the F40 obsolete. Ferrari, realizing this, began working on what would be their first factory GT race car in 3 decades. They already had an optimal platform for taking the fight to McLaren and the rest of the GT1 field. They would develop a completely new GT1 race car based off of their newest flagship, the F50. With the F50 road car being one of the most underrated cars of the 90s, I feel obligated to give it the proper rundown it deserves. The production of the leading edge F40 would end in 1992, being the very last Ferrari developed with the oversight of Enzo himself, who passed away in 1988. Approaching the mid-90s, Ferrari needed a replacement for their halo car, fast. While the F40 was derived from the Group B rally-focused 288 Evoluzione, their new halo car would be Formula 1 derived. In fact, to this very day, it's still considered to be the closest creation to a road-going F1 car Ferrari has ever created. I'm referring to the development of the Ferrari F50, which launched in 1995. It would feature a mid-mounted F130B 4.7-liter naturally aspirated V12. This was a direct, streetable derivative of the 3.5-liter V12 found in the 1990 Ferrari 641, also known as the F190. The rear longitudinal mounted V12 made 520 brake horsepower at 8,500 RPM, which would equate to well over 100 horsepower per liter. Each bank featured dual overhead cams and 5 valves per cylinder, in which the compression ratio was 11.3 to 1. But it gets even better. The F130 V12 was already race proven. The previous year in 1994, Ferrari would reveal the F130E powered 333 SP. It would take the IMSA GT Championship at Road Atlanta with a 1-2 finish at its premier race. Later, it would go on to take the overall championship the following year. Taking a moment to put this into perspective, the F50 used the same power plant derived from Ferrari's most successful race car at the time, which was also derived from the 6-time Grand Prix winning F190. Driven by Alain Prost in 1990, this was the only car that came close to beating Senna in the McLaren Honda MP45, with Prost losing the Drivers' Championship by only 7 points. If there was ever an engine for Ferrari to put in a halo car, this would be it.
Unfortunately, we touched in the first corner when we were fighting for the lead, and we both went off.
The dry sump V12 would make over 30 more horsepower than the F40, but the naturally aspirated motor made less torque than the renowned turbocharged F40 2.9-liter V8. This lower torque output would of course give the F50 a perceived lack of power compared to its older sibling. The claimed performance increases of the F50 over the F40 were negligible at best. Though the F40 was supposed to be an extreme homologation-derived sports car, the F50 was considered too harsh, while at the same time failing to pick up where the F40 left off. For its time, the F40 was just leading edge. Many would argue it was simply ahead of its time and it couldn't be duplicated. Added to this was the fact that it was the last car developed with the oversight of Enzo Ferrari himself. Furthermore, the F50 arrived the year after the McLaren F1 premiered, which at the time was considered the fastest production car the world had ever seen. On top of that, while Ferrari was releasing the F50 road car, McLaren would be already premiering the F1 GTR at Le Mans in 1995, where it would dominate the field. Shortly after, Ferrari engineers would begin developing the most extreme GT car in the company's history. The Lara and ATR were brought on board to assist in the development of the full-on race car prototype, but it would be built completely in-house by Ferrari. This new GT1 car would feature a tuned F130, designated as the F130A, producing an incredibly naturally aspirated 739 horsepower minimum at 10,500 RPM. For reference, the F190 had produced 735 horsepower at 14,800 RPM. This car would keep the same 4.7-liter displacement as the street car, equating to an impressive 160 brake horsepower per liter. I might add that there has been speculation over the years that this horsepower figure was underrated by Ferrari, and that chassis 001 made closer to 950 brake horsepower. Race driver Johannes van Overbeek, one of the very few lucky individuals on the planet who was fortunate enough to drive a F50 GT1 on track, would state, "As a reference, I've driven a Porsche 935 with a dyno sheet documented 750 horsepower that weighed about the same as this Ferrari, and that Porsche felt slow by comparison. If I were to guess, I'd say the GT1 delivers something approaching 900 horsepower. That's serious power. This Ferrari is the fastest thing I've ever driven." Torque would also be increased from 347 at 6,500 RPM to 390 foot-pounds at 7,500 RPM. The iron block aluminum head V12 retained the same over-square 85mm bore and 69mm stroke configuration. Compression would increase from the street car's 11.3 to 1 to 11.9 to 1. The full rotating assembly was forged, of course, including the titanium connecting rods. Power was transmitted to the rear wheels via a multi-plate clutch and 6-speed Hewland sequential transaxle with Le Mans specific gearing. Given that the F50 was a Formula One derived street car, it already had mini racing and track focus amenities. The GT1 car would retain the same carbon fiber monocoque, but the car as a whole would be an impressive 800 pounds lighter, with a dry weight of 1,900 pounds or 860 kilograms. So in all actuality, Ferrari engineers had developed the GT sports car with a power to weight ratio of the FIA Group C car, like an XJR9 or 787B. The body will receive suitable aero and cooling enhancements utilizing a fixed roof with the iconic intake that was designed to funnel air directly to the intake plenum. The front clip will receive a wider bumper and hood, both having enlarged air inlets. The rear engine cover of the monocoque was redesigned, removing the integrated rear spoiler and incorporating 2 carbon fiber uprights that supported the massive adjustable rear wing. The new rear diffuser was sit underneath. The brakes would be upgraded to carbon ceramic, while the now track-tuned suspension used the same pushrod member configuration as the street car, an F1 machine it was originally developed from. Finally, the interior was completely stripped and featured an FIA homologated roll cage, harness, and a Momo bucket seat. The prototyping phase had been completed, and Ferrari would officially designate their newest race car as the F50 GT. It was then that the GT would be tested at Ferrari's Fiorano circuit, and the results were likely unexpected. Italian F1 driver Nicola Larini would reportedly clock faster lap times than those achieved in the 333 SP, an LMP race car. Supposedly several seconds quicker, which if true would make the F50 GT a sub 1 minute 10 second car, thus making it the fastest race car till this very day to ever lap Fiorano that we are aware of, with the exclusion of only Ferrari's F1 cars. But while externally this can be perceived as a complete success on the part of Ferrari, as we all may know by now, it was actually all in vain. With the prototype complete, the car was now set to compete in the 1997 FIA GT Championship, formerly known as the BPR Series, replacing the F40 GTE. There were a minimum of 5 cars that we know were intended for racing teams, while potentially additional models would go to the privateer teams. According to Ferrari historian Michael Sheehan, 2 F50 GTs were to go to Scandia Racing, 2 more to Ferrari Club Italia, which was going to run the Benetton sponsorship, and a 5th car was going to be supplied to Momo Corsa. In 1997, however, no car was received by any teams. Ferrari scuttled the F50 GT program. The test mule, chassis serial number 001, will be sold off, and the remaining 2 chassis, serial number 002 and 003, would also be sold once assembled. Reportedly, there were an additional 3 tubs that were dismantled, repurposed, or destroyed, depending on who you talk to. Now I will be going over the multiple reasons discussed or rumored throughout the years that explain Ferrari's abrupt ending of the program. All are plausible and all could be true, with none being mutually exclusive. I will be numbering 1 and 2 as the most obvious and official reasons, while reasons 3 and 4 are rumor derived but also plausible. For the 97 season, the FIA had changed the homologation rules of the GT1 class. Recognized as the second era, or 1997 to 1998, this is the period where we saw GT sports cars transition into the early prototypes. This class spawned the birth of the legendary COK GTR and 911 GT1. This new generation of GT1 cars actually shared nothing in common with the road-going COK or 911 outside of headlights and taillights. They were simply silhouettes. For example, the 911 GT1 actually had more in common with the Group C962 using the same rear subframe and engine. It was even mid-engine, not rear engine like the traditional 911. The F1 GTR would even be rendered uncompetitive, despite McLaren doing extensive modification to the bodywork and powertrain, creating the new long-tail variant. So this would be rather self-explanatory on why Ferrari would stop development and focus elsewhere outside of GT1, which leads me to reason number 2. This is known as the official reason stated by Ferrari, or at least the reason told to the public. The F50 GT program was cancelled due to the high development costs. Ferrari didn't follow through because it was concentrating its energies at the time on a Formula 1 comeback. This strategy proved to be highly successful on Ferrari's part, leading into the Schumacher era of Formula 1, with Ferrari winning back-to-back constructor championships for 5 years straight, from 1999 to 2004. Reason number 3 will point to the GT1's hot lap being several seconds quicker than the very profitable 333 SP. The 333 SP was very successful in the IMSA GT series all the way up to 2001, with 56 wins and 69 poles. It would even go on to compete in Le Mans. Reason number 4. F1 head Bernie Ecclestone played some influence in Ferrari's decision. He didn't want Ferrari diverting resources away from F1. Ecclestone didn't want the Ferrari name competing in any other rival racing series that he did not profit from. Remember, race cars like the F40 GTE and 333 SP would continue to compete in FIA and the IMSA racing series, but these were run by private teams, not Ferrari themselves. Again, all these reasons could have some truth to them, but number 2 is the only one that can be considered official. Regardless, the FIA rule change triggered the arrival of the purpose-built race cars from Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, and later on in 1998, Toyota with the TS020 and Nissan with the R390. Ferrari would have needed to invest a lot more resources to make the F50 GT competitive, likely requiring an entirely new platform that would be more of a prototype racer opposed to a sports car. But imagine if the FIA had not changed the GT1 regulations so radically and the F50 GT did compete. This would be argued as the biggest what if in Ferrari's history. Could you imagine an F1 GTR and F50 GT battle? It definitely remains the most insane GT race car to come out of Maranello, also one of the rarest Ferraris on the planet with only 3 in existence. Its street-going counterpart has also done well in the long game, with the F50 becoming far more desirable over the years. With only 350 made, it's more rare than the F40, Enzo, and LaFerrari. Some even consider it to be a grail car. As time goes on, it becomes increasingly absurd how unappreciated the F50 was in the 90s. There's one thing for certain though, it remains the one true V12 powered F1 car for the streets.